Hello and happy 2023. I cannot believe we are starting a new year off, but I can't wait to see where this year takes us. Today we have Sarah. She is back on today. She actually was on a little bit ago, but we had some time craziness, so we are having her back on for a full episode. So welcome, Sarah.
Hello, glad to be back.
So happy to have you back. So fun to be co-hosting with our VBAC doulas. If you guys did not know, we have a VBAC doula certification for VBAC. And yeah, we're going to start hearing from some of our VBAC doulas because I'm going to have them on here and there as co-hosts. I'm so excited to have them on, share where they're at, and of course, have them be a part of this amazing community too. Sharing these stories and hearing these stories on this podcast, seriously, like it lights my day up. So on those days where I'm like, okay, we've got 4 hours of podcasts, like a lot of people might dread 4 hours of work, but I don't see it as 4 hours of work. I see it as 4 hours of inspiration and motivation for me to keep going on the VBAC link and to share these stories with you. So we have our friend Holly today, and she's going to share her VBAC story, but I'm going to have Sarah read a review of the week before we do.
Okay, this review is from Apple Podcasts, and I hope I'm saying this username correctly, but it's Kiowa Glover.
Yeah, when I saw that, I was like,
Kiowa Glover, I believe. And it says, as a doula, I'm grateful for platforms like this to refer to clients and for me to learn as well.
Oh, I love that. It's kind of fun. So today we've got myself, Sarah, Holly, and then Kiowa. I don't even know how to say it.
Kiowa Glover. That's what I'm going with.
Glover, yes. And we're all doulas. So kind of a fun story about Holly, or a fun background, is she's actually a registered nurse by trade. But after her VBAC, she found the passion, just like a lot of us do, and has since become a doula and a placenta encapsulator. So I think it's kind of fun how we're sharing a VBAC story, but together, even with the review, I didn't even make that connection until you just said that. But we're all doulas today. So yay for doulas. And I'm so excited to get into Holly's story.
You are tuned into the VBAC Link podcast with Meagan Heaton, who is a longtime doula and VBAC mom herself, here to help you get inspired for birth after having had a C-section. Along with this podcast, the VBAC Link offers blogs, resources, and a comprehensive VBAC course for both parents preparing for birth and doulas wanting to take their VBAC education to the next level. Be sure to follow Meagan and her team on all social media platforms for even more. Although these podcast episodes are VBAC specific, it is encouraged for all expectant moms to listen and educate themselves on how to avoid a C-section from the get-go. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is not meant to replace advice from any other qualified medical professional. Here is your host, Meagan.
Okay, everybody. Holly, thank you so much for taking the time today to share your story. I know you've got your little one in a wrap strapped to your chest. So stinking adorable. How old is your baby?
He is 7 weeks today. We're going on 2 months. Yeah.
I was going to say, he looked really little and he was like trying to turn into the camera.
I know.
Oh, well, I would love to turn the time. Well, we would love to turn the time over to you to share your VBAC story. And of course, your C-section if you would like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a bit of a journey with my birth stories. My first daughter, she's 4.5 now. So I was pregnant a little over 5 years ago with her, and I was finishing up nursing school, and, I was really into like the medical model of care at that point, just being in nursing school and getting all that information. And so during my pregnancy, it was my last semester, and I was with a midwife at a clinic, and overall had a great pregnancy, great care, and finished nursing school, took my NCLEX, finished everything. And so we were in the last few weeks of pregnancy, and I got to about 41 weeks with her, and we had those tests at the end, so you can check to see like their growth.
It's like fluid. a third trimester ultrasound where they kind of go
it's like,
through everything.
You go, you go overdue, and they're like, let's make sure everything's okay, blah, blah, blah. And so the ultrasound went by, and like, they can't tell you anything in the ultrasounds. And then my midwife had called me later that evening, and she's like, you know, your baby is actually breech, and these are my recommendations, and so on. And so like at that point, like I still had prepared myself for a natural birth. I didn't want to do an epidural. I wanted as little intervention as possible. And so like, I didn't even like think of that as like a thing that could happen. And so it just like tore my heart out. And like, 41 weeks, you're like so emotional, full of hormones. And so it took me a long time to process it. And I went and had a consult with an OB at the local hospital. And they're like, well, we could try turning the baby, but at this point, you're 41 weeks. There's a lot of risk to it. And they're like, basically your only option is a C-section. I'm like, okay. And like, I know I didn't have all the education and resources that I have now. So at that point, I had to put a lot of trust into the medical system and took their word for it. And we had a planned C-section with her, but I was 41 and a half weeks by the time we actually scheduled it. So it wasn't an emergency. They weren't, they're like, if you go into labor, it's an emergency, but we'll still schedule it for, for 3 or 4 days from now. And so it overall, my C-section went really well. I was able to have my baby to skin right away. She never left me. Like we stayed together, which was awesome. And I had a really good recovery from that. Thank God. There wasn't like huge traumas with it, but even just once I got pregnant with my second, I realized how actually like traumatic emotionally it was for me. So it took a lot of healing and processing and to be able to kind of give myself that second chance and to go for my first VBAC. And about a year and a half later, I got pregnant with my second daughter. She is now 2.5 years old. And at that point, I really had gotten into more, I was still working as a nurse, and I had really gotten into more of like natural living and natural solutions and just a holistic view on health. And I had hired a doula. At that point, I was interviewing providers at the hospital, and I hired a doula who was going through midwifery school. And she was just a wealth of knowledge. And I had a doula with my first baby, but it just wasn't what I had expected out of a doula, unfortunately. But my doula with my second baby, she was absolutely incredible. She just provided me with so much information and was there for me to support me, to help me through like all my emotions with my first birth. And so talking with her about my providers I had interviewed and telling her, I'm like, I still just don't feel comfortable with choosing one. She was like, well, have you gave home birth a thought, or like hiring a midwife? And I'm like, well, there's no midwives at the hospital that will take me because they can't take VBACs at the hospital. And in Minnesota, the home midwives are allowed to take on VBACs at home, and they don't have a huge restrictions there on home birth midwives. And so I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'm like, I don't know, there's, these risks that I'm just like, not sure if I'm comfortable with that right now. She's like, well, either way, you could always like interview one and just like get the information. So you have both sides on, so which way you want to choose, you're fully informed. And I said, yeah, you're right. So my husband and I interviewed a couple midwives, and a couple of them were, one of them was a little iffy on like taking us on. She didn't really seem very comfortable with VBAC, which was fine. And then another one was pretty good. She was more medically minded. And then I had interviewed a third midwife, and she had a lot of experience with VBACs and was just like overall just matched really well with us. And we ended up choosing to home birth with my second baby. And so just that whole prenatal care with our home birth midwife, she was just, it was incredible. The prenatal care alone was just so different from clinic setting. And so I was about 40 weeks at that point, and we were going for our home birth, and you get to that 40-week mark and you're just like, okay, when is this going to happen? Like, you're like, I'm so ready to have this baby, but also like trying to trust your body and like, you know, knowing when that time is right. And so I was a couple of days away from 42 weeks, and labor happened spontaneously. And I labored at home with my doula. And then my midwife came later on. My husband was there, my mom, and I labored for a total of 24 hours. And we ended up suspecting, after checking my cervix and checking baby's position, that she was like stuck. Her head was flexed. So her chin was up instead of tucked down to her chest. So she was stuck on my pelvic bone for quite a while. And so, you know, after assessing risk and everything, we ultimately decided to transfer into the hospital. And the hospital was 5 minutes from us. So it was like one of those things where just like kind of comforting knowing that it was so close. But also like in this pregnancy and in this experience with my second, I really had a hard time letting go of control and really like trusting my body fully, like 100%. And I think that also kind of affected the way I labored and my thought process. And so we transferred into the hospital and had a really great resident doctor. She was incredible. She was like, you know, you do your thing, do what you need to do. Just let us know what you need. And the OB that was there, she was a different story. But I ended up laboring there for about 8 more hours. And that included about an hour and a half of pushing. And then I had my first VBAC at the hospital. And it was just, she came out, she was just screaming and crying, eyes wide open. And I just remember crying and saying, we did it. I couldn't believe it. I was just like in shock. And it was very healing. But later on, I had found that there were still parts of it that were a little traumatic for me, and that I had things to heal from that birth too. Even though I successfully had a VBAC, it was different and not fully what I expected. And so that leads me into my third and final baby here. We again decided to plan for a home birth. My daughter was about a little less than 2, and my other daughter a little less than 4 when I got pregnant with him. And again, we decided to home birth, and my husband was like, are you sure? Like, last time we ended up going to the hospital. Like, do you think that's just going to be easier if we just plan for that this time? I said, no, absolutely not. We're having this baby at home. My mindset was so different. I started as a doula after my second daughter was born. And I had really gotten into natural birth and trusting your body, and just like knowing that our bodies were designed for this. Like, our bodies are perfectly designed for birth. And yes, there's always other, there's times where medical intervention is needed, but really, I just was so in this mindset of, I can do this. Like, this is it. Like, this is my redemption. Like, I know I can do this. And so I didn't even have to interview any midwives. I actually hired my doula from my second birth. She had become a midwife and was practicing. And I just instantly knew, like, her philosophy and her beliefs surrounding birth were exactly what I needed in my prenatal care and my birth, everything. And we started seeing her from about 16 weeks onward. And so we had all our prenatal care at home. It was incredible. She really put everything into my hands. Like, which is what I wanted. I wanted control of, the tests that we didn't do, everything. And we weren't going to have an ultrasound to find out the sex, but ultimately my husband and I agreed to have a quick 20-week ultrasound, but we had it at 23 weeks. And we found out the sex, and we were just so surprised and so happy, because we were having a boy. And, if we'd been having a girl too, of course, we'd have been just as happy. But, at that point I could get rid of all my girl clothes and start, organizing and getting ready. It was just like one of those things that my heart needed. And so with my midwife that we had, she, like I said, she really put the control in my hands. I felt I felt so much respect from her, and just, I felt like, you know, every decision I made, I was fully informed. I understood everything. I made the decisions that were best for me and my baby and our family. And leading up to my birth, it was like, I remember those few weeks before, we talked about like fears and, you know, if there's anything I needed to process before my labor. And, you know, at this time I was like, no, like really, like I feel good. Like I don't have any fears. There's part of me that I was like, you know, what if we do transfer to the hospital? But like, then there's another part of me that's like, don't worry about that. Like, that's like, just kind of put that out. You've done it before, you know what to do. And so I kind of put that out of my head too. And I was like, no, we're having this baby at home. And we actually were planning to move across country down to South Carolina in September. And so it was like, my midwife was like, do you feel like okay about this like timeline you're on? I'm like, oh yeah, like I'll go to 42 weeks and I'll still have 3 weeks before we have to move. Like it'll be fine. And she was just like, I can't believe you're fine with that. I'm like, yeah, I feel totally good with it. Like I have so much support, and my husband's family were coming right after the baby was born. Like just the amount of support we had was exactly what we needed. And I'm so thankful for that. And so near the end of my pregnancy with our son, there was a couple points where we actually thought he was breech. And so those brought back a lot of feelings. And I kept telling my midwife through my pregnancy, I'm like, this pregnancy feels a lot like my first, like just my cravings, everything. And she was like, okay. And then, you know, we ended up thinking that he was breech. I'm like, oh, great, here we go. But at that point I was like, you know, it doesn't matter what position he's in. Like, I'm still letting myself go into labor. I'm still going to, if he was breech, I was still going to birth him vaginally and everything. So it like didn't matter to me, but it was also like, okay, I have to prepare for this if this is if this is a change of plans. So another midwife locally, she has a little ultrasound that you can plug into your phone. And so we checked quick to see where his head was, just so we could confirm and prepare if needed. And she's like, yeah, you know, I think he's breech. I think this is his head up here. And she goes, you know, let me check a little bit lower. And so we checked even a little bit lower. But it turns out his head was just like super, super deep in my pelvis. And, you know, I'm sure I probably was dilated to maybe 2 or 3 with him, because he was just so low in my pelvis where they were feeling his shoulders when they palpate. So anyways, that was like, okay, throw it out the window. He's head down. We're good to go. And so, you know, just the next few weeks, I was I'd say about 39 weeks, maybe a little bit before that. And I started having prodromal labor, and I kept referring to it as that. And I'd have contractions all day long, and then I'd go to sleep at night and they'd go away. Nothing would happen. And they were like, fine. They weren't like contractions that I'm like, oh man, you know, trying to breathe through anything, but they were uncomfortable. And like, they had changed from my like Braxton Hicks throughout, because I had Braxton Hicks throughout my pregnancy too. So they had changed. They were stronger and lower. And so it's just like one of those things that just kind of messes with your head. And you're like, okay, could this be it? You're like, no, probably not. I'm just going to go to sleep. And then you wake up in the morning. It's like, okay, no, baby. And so weeks of that. And it was just physically exhausting, mentally exhausting. And it's just, then you get people, you know, family who are like, okay, when is the baby coming? I'm like, you know, I don't know. It's like, you want to zone, you want to tune everyone out. But at the same time, you can still hear them, and you get in your own head. And that's why now, like when all my clients, I'm like, don't tell anyone your due date. Just don't. Yeah. Like tell them your birth month, like sometime in August. That is it. Because it's like, people, you know, people mean well, and like, they don't, you know, necessarily mean to be like pushy with it, but
I know.
It's just one of those things where it's just like, it doesn't help. It really doesn't. And yeah. So, and then there was one weekend, it was, man, I was 41 and 2 or 3 days. And that weekend I just told my husband, I'm like, we just need to go. I need to get out of the house. I need to go out and do things all day long. I don't want to be here contracting and whatever. And he's like, okay, all right, that's fine. So we took the girls and went to my sister's camper, and we were there all day swimming and hanging out. And I started having contractions. I'm like, oh man, like, and I get like twinging pains in my cervix, and like, okay, this is different. Like, this is maybe something's happening. Okay, I'm just gonna be patient and just keep myself busy. And I went to the bathroom later on around dinner time, and I actually had brought my daughter to the bathroom. I'm like, okay, I'll go too. And I wiped, and I'm like, oh my God, there's some mucus plug on my toilet paper. I'm like, yes. Things are happening. I'm like, okay, back to trusting my body and like knowing that everything's happening within the right time. And then I went out, of course, and told my husband. He's like, okay, do we need to go? I'm like, no, we're fine. We're going to stay here. We're going to finish our day and go home. So we went home, and, more contractions, a little bit feeling like there are more. And actually a week before this, I forgot to mention this, my midwife was like, stop referring it to prodromal labor. She goes, think of it as early labor. So I'm like, okay, been in early labor for 2 weeks now. I'm like, that's not helping, but okay. And
well, I will say this though. Sometimes when we tell our clients like, oh, it looks like it's prodromal labor, they're like, so you're telling me I'm not laboring? So maybe if we change it to early labor, it's just like, I don't know. Like you said, it's really long early labor.
Yeah, I know. And like, it kind of helps. It's like, okay, it's all a process. It's all doing something. Like, it's not for nothing. Like, your body, like my body was doing, I don't know, like maybe he wasn't in the right position. Maybe he was in a funky position where it's like, okay, like my body wants to birth him, but he wasn't finding the right position. The reason why prodromal happens is because our uterus is brilliant and is trying to work and get our baby into the right spot before labor begins. Yes. So much yes. And so then the next morning came, I'm like, okay, I slept all night. I'm like, that's great, but nothing happened. And okay, what are we going to do today? And so we drove about 45 minutes north to my dad's house. And my husband's like, do you think this is too far? I'm like, no, it's fine. And I'm like, this is kind of going to be like our last time at my dad's house before we have the baby and then move. And I'm like, this is what I need. And so we spent the day on the lake, swimming and just hanging out. I still had those contractions, some twinging. And I'm like, okay, this is good. Like, we're just having a nice time. And then we went home and had dinner and went on a walk with our girls. And then I think it was that night we had a couple friends over there fixing something on my husband's car. And then I went back inside and I got my girls to sleep. And then I went to the bathroom and I noticed even more mucus plug that night. And okay, awesome. Like, we're on the right path still. And then we went to sleep that night. And then actually early Monday, that was a Sunday night. So early Monday morning, like at 3 a.m., I was kind of waking on and off to these stronger contractions and kind of like I was sleeping, but I was like breathing through them, but they were just, I could tell that it was more than what it was before. And so that morning comes, I told my husband, and he actually had an interview for a new job that day virtually. He's like, well, I have to be at this interview. I'm like, okay, it's fine. We're not going to have a baby yet. And so we went throughout that day and I had like these contractions. I was breathing through them and kind of stopping what I was doing, like kind of shushing my girls and being like, hey, I need this moment to like get through this and then we're good. And then my midwives came over to check on me and my contractions stopped. They went away. And I was like, okay, this is obviously like my body telling me that I need like alone time. And so they left and then like my contractions started coming back again. And my girls were around, they're 4 and 2. They're just nuts at this point. So it was kind of like my body knew to like hold off for a while. And then I actually went to Target with my mom later in the afternoon and we bought a rocking chair. So I'm like, I need a chair. This is going to happen soon. I wasn't going to get one because we were moving. I'm like, nope, I'm just going to do it. So we were walking around Target and I'm just having these contractions and stopping. She goes, are you sure we're okay to be here? I'm like, it's fine. Everything's fine. And I'm like, it's not happening yet. It's still kind of, just in denial. And we get home and, we do our nightly walks with the girls and I'm like curb walking and just trying to get things to keep going and get stronger. I'm like, okay, I texted my midwife. I'm like, yeah, they're like, 10 minutes apart. They're definitely stronger and like lower and like more painful. So I'm like, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens later. She's like, okay, whatever. And then that night we were outside, and my daughter, Hannah, she's my 2-year-old, and she's like, I'm ready to go to bed. I'm like, okay. I'm like, let's go. We get her inside. My husband and my other daughter outside's playing still. And I got her to bed, and we just like cuddled in her bed and like just got all that oxytocin flowing, you know. And then after that, I'm like, my contractions are really starting to like pick up, starting to get a little closer together. They're about like 8 minutes at this point. And I started texting my husband. I'm like, where are you? Where's Callie? You need to get her to bed now. And then I actually called my husband's parents. I'm like, can you pray for me? Like, I want you to pray over me now. Like, I feel like things are like, something's going to happen here soon. And maybe tonight's the night. And so just having that prayer like really helps like me like calm down and really like settle down. And then after that, my husband comes in with my daughter, and she's like not wanting to go to sleep, keeps coming out of her room. And I told her, I'm like, okay, I don't know what came over me, but I'm like, you need to get her to bed right now. Like, she cannot be out here anymore. Like, I can't do this. He goes, okay, all right. It's like, and finally she goes to sleep and stays in her room, and he's in there with her until she falls asleep. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to make myself some toast and a snack and just like some tea and relax a little bit and maybe just go to sleep. And so I'm in my kitchen, and all of a sudden I have this contraction just like comes over my whole entire body. I'm like, oh man, I'm like, this is it. Like, I'm like, this is the one. Like, this is the start of it. And then finally I like took myself out of denial. I'm like, okay, things are going to happen. And then at the top of this contraction, I'm standing at my kitchen sink and my water breaks, and my husband's in my daughter's room. I don't have my phone on me, and I'm just like, oh my God. Okay.
Like, okay, this isn't going to stop. I don't have to think this is going to stop.
I know. I'm like, this is real now. I'm like, my water broke. Like, this is actually happening. Like, it took my water breaking for me to like actually believe it at this point. And thankfully I was actually standing over a rug by my kitchen sink. I'm like, okay, this is great. I'm on a rug, but I don't want to move. I don't want to walk down to my room. And so I stand there for like a minute. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, Jason, my husband's name is Jason. And he doesn't hear me, of course, because he's in my daughter's room. And so then I finally like waddle over to waddle down the hallway, down to our room. And I get my phone and I text my husband. I'm like, my water broke. And he goes, great. Texts back, great. I'm like, oh my God. like, I don't know what he was thinking. And then I called my midwife, and I was really calm. I was like, hey, my water broke and things are happening. And she goes, okay, great. Like, how far apart are your contractions? I'm like, they're probably like 6 to 8 minutes, like 8-ish minutes, I guess. And she goes, okay, well, why don't you time them for the next half hour, and then just like text me and let me know how they are. I'm like, okay. So, you know, I have some time. And then little did I know, she was actually texting my husband. She's like, I'm on my way. I'll be there soon. As soon as I can. Because she's like, I don't want to miss this, your birth. And so my husband finally comes out of the room, and like, I wasn't like panicking, but I was just like more so excited and just being like, okay, it's happening. Like this is it. Like, this is what we've been preparing for, like, and waiting for. And just because at this point, I was just like emotional every day about wanting to have my baby and not be pregnant anymore. And he's like, hey, great. Like, what do you need from me? And at this point, I'm like already like cleaning up our room, and like, not because we were having our midwives over, but like mostly because I just wanted our room to be prepared. And like, I had everything set up, like my twinkle lights, my affirmations, everything. And so at that point, my contractions were all of a sudden 3 to 4 minutes apart. So as soon as my water broke, they really got going, and I was starting to labor through them now, and breathing and moaning and, you know, doing all the labor things. And I found my like ideal position of laboring. I was on my knees, hunched over my bed, because my bed was just like on the floor at that point. And my husband's like, you know, tell me what I can do. How can I help? I'm like, with my first VBAC during my labor, I had this weird, sharp, like dull pain. It was so hard to describe down my right leg. It was from like my butt all the way down to my heel. And it was awful. It never went away. And I couldn't find anything that made it comfortable. So I'm like, can you just massage my legs? I had that same pain this time through every contraction. And I think that was like my only like fearful thing, that I didn't want to have that this time. And of course I did. And so I'm like, just massage my leg. So he grabs some towel and he's massaging my leg through every contraction in between. And then he's doing counter pressure on my back. And at this point, I'm like, things are really picking up very fast. So my water broke at about 8:40ish. And my midwife and her assistant midwife, and then another student, they got there at about 9:40 because she lived about 45 minutes away. And so they got there and I was really in labor land and just really in it, really in the thick of it. And I just remember thinking, I'm like, why am I not getting a break? I'm like, these contractions just keep coming quicker and quicker. And like, I'm not having as much time between. And I'm like, I told her, I'm like, why am I not getting a break? She goes, well, things are happening fast. Like, okay, all right. And still not really thinking anything of it. And then, so I was in that on my knees position, laboring, which felt super great. And my husband was like doing counter pressure perfectly through every single contraction, bless his heart. And then at one point I'm like, okay, I got to get up. I have to go pee. Like, it's been a while. And so they're like, okay, you have to get up. Let's go to the bathroom, sit on the toilet for a little bit, it'll be good for labor, good for dilating, everything. I'm like, okay, I can do that. And it took all my might to stand up because his head was in my pelvis. And it was just like, I don't know, some women labor standing up and like push and everything. I just cannot even imagine. Cause like I stood up and I just waddled. I'm like, this is the weirdest feeling and like so uncomfortable. And I got to the bathroom, which is attached to our room, thankfully, and got onto the toilet. And I remember being like, I can't pee. Like in my previous labor, that same thing happened. And they actually gave me a catheter and took out like a ton of pee. And then which eventually actually helped my baby come down. But so this time that happened, I'm like, oh no, I'm like, we're going to have to put a catheter in. She goes, no, just like give her some time. And we were on the toilet for maybe 10 minutes. And I had a couple contractions that were just like, they felt good this time. Like they didn't hurt. They just felt like my body was just like, it's so hard to describe. And now looking back, I'm like, okay, that was my body pushing. So this time I really got to experience that, like my body is actually doing it. Like I'm not pushing, like I'm not doing anything. Like these contractions are just, they're pushing my baby out. And she's like, okay, why don't you put your hand down there and like, just see if you can feel baby. And to my surprise, I'm like, oh my God, his head's like maybe like a knuckle deep. I'm sorry if that's too much information. But he was so close. He was right there. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing it. Like my body is doing it. He's doing it. Like we're so close. And then I had like another contraction that was very light and didn't feel like it did anything at all. I'm like, I don't know what that was. Felt like, I'm sure it was like my body just getting a little bit of a break. And it's still at that point, I didn't think I was about to birth him. But another contraction came and I put my hand down and this contraction came on so suddenly and my body just was like pushing and all of a sudden I felt my baby's head just emerge and like my hand was over at the top of his head and I was still on the toilet and I was like, oh my God, I'm like, he's coming right now. Like I need to get off this toilet. He cannot be born into the toilet. Like that cannot happen. And my midwife's in front of me beside the toilet and my husband's behind me. He was doing the counter pressure. And then, so I told him, like, you have to lift me up. He's like, okay, here's a stool back here. I'm like, no, I can't sit on a stool right now. I'm like, you just need to hold me. He's coming right now. And then I told my midwife, I'm like, you have to catch him. Our bathroom is tile. I'm like, he cannot hit the floor. And this is all just coming out like super quickly at this point because things were just happening fast. And so then my body, like his head was born and then my body stopped and then it started contracting again and his whole body, he just came out and my midwife just kind of swooped him up and like, it was very like quick. She brought him right up to my chest and he was right there with me. And it was just like, oh my God, I couldn't believe how quickly he came out and how my body had done that so much work at that point. And, at first he wasn't crying. He was actually very pale and floppy. And I was, it gives you like a little bit of like okay, are they going to be okay? Like, if I'm calling out to him, I'm saying his name and I'm like, Mom, your mom's here. Like, we're here. We love you. And just like, yeah, it was. And then I saw one of the assistant midwives give the ampu bag to my midwife because it had been about a minute at that point, and he hadn't quite pinked up and cried yet. And we're just kind of giving him the time that he needed. And in my heart, I knew he'd be okay. And I knew that he just needed some time, and that he just came out so quickly, and he was stunned. And so just over a minute came and he started crying, and it was just, that it's like they come out and they're born and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, yes. But then that first cry and that first, like when they make that face and you're just like, oh my God. And like, okay, like they're here, like we did it. Like everything's like, they're okay. And we just, it was just amazing how just, most of the time at like hospital, if that were to happen, I say most of the time, not always, but they want to help them breathe. They want to suction them. They want to beg them, they want to do all these things to help them breathe. And we really just gave him that time that he needed to come into his body and be there with us. And it was just, it wasn't traumatic for us at all. Like, I think if like someone would have put a bag on him or suction him, that would have been more traumatic than this experience. And so he came to, and he got pink and started crying, and, we're just holding him, and oh my gosh, it was just like, it was a different feeling than my first VBAC. It was just like, I truly believed in my body's ability and my baby. And just, we prayed so much about having our baby at home, and we just felt so safe. And just, my husband was there behind me, and he was crying and I was crying. It's just, everyone's crying at this point. And me and my midwife were just so close. She was one of my really good friends too. So it just made it even that much more special. And
it was just such an intimate time, and everyone's probably feeling all of the things. That's how it was at my birth too. Like, everyone's watched you work so hard and go through all of this, right? And now you're here and you just did it. And so the emotions are high.
Oh yeah. And I just remember, I'm like, you want to sit down on the floor, like get comfortable? I'm like, no, I just want to go to my bed. Like, are you sure? You just had a baby. I'm like, I know, I just want to go to my bed. Like, that's where I want to be. Like, that was the goal. That was like a big reason of wanting to birth at home, which like, I just want to be in my bed. And so we got up from my bed. And another thing that we had actually thought near the end of my pregnancy was that there could have been a hiding twin. We were either like, your baby's either really big, or maybe there's a twin in there or something. He just took up, I had a lot of fluid, and he just, he took up the space that he wanted. And so I started having these cramps again. And she goes, do you mind if she wanted to actually listen. And so I don't think she actually listened. But then we felt, and we're like, okay, no, that's your placenta. It's like the clot behind the placenta was the hard spot we were feeling, because my placenta was anterior. She's like, okay, I don't think there's another baby. I'm like, oh God, I hope not. I'm like, I'm having another baby. But no, it was my placenta.
Surprise.
I know. And I'm like, no, I told her the whole time, I'm like, that's not going to happen. I'm like, I don't know if it was like intuitively or just like didn't want that to happen. I'm like, no. And so about a half hour went by, and then I was able to birth my placenta. I had my midwife assist me with it a little bit, just because I hadn't done that with my second, and because, at the hospital, they managed it, and which actually wasn't what I wanted either. But so I didn't have that experience of like naturally birthing my placenta yet. And so I was just like, can I just want your assistant? And she, helped me with that. And it came out perfectly. And it was really cool, because being a placenta encapsulator, I'm like, I really want to like assess and look at my own placenta. And so I was able to do that, and it was perfect. It looked great. And my amniotic sac was just huge. I mean, you could just tell like I had lots of water in there. And he was actually only 7 pounds, 12 ounces. So he was my smallest baby.
Oh.
But yeah, so my first she was 7 pounds, 15 ounces. And then my second with my VBAC, she was 8 pounds, 9 ounces. So I mean, not like huge by the way. Not super small. Yeah. But it was just, I'm like, wow, that's such a, I'm like, actually my husband and I had a bet going that he would name him if he was under 7 pounds, and I would name him if he was over 8 pounds. I'm like, he's for sure going to be over 8 pounds. Like, I got this. But no, he won that one, but I actually still named him.
Oh,
that's an interesting way to choose who gets to pick the name.
I know. And really, I mean, I knew, like, I'm like, either way it goes, I still want the name that I want. And he loves the name that I picked too. Yes. I was just like, I'm like, okay, fine. We'll have it. Since we couldn't agree on it, we made a bet.
I love that. That's so fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it was just such a great, such a good experience. And it healed from my first birth, healed my second birth, and just was like the most redemptive, healing birth I could ask for. Wow. And it was just like the cherry on top of my birth experiences, really. So it was just amazing how I went from, my C-section, and then I went to my home birth, transferred to the hospital, but still had my VBAC, and then had my VBAC at home on my terms and in my own space with the people that I chose to be there. Yeah.
You've kind of experienced, a whole slew of outcomes, which is kind of fun. And I'm assuming it will help you in your doula career too. Like, if you do have a home birth transfer client, you can say, like, I get it. I've been here. Like, this is what we're going to do when we get there, and kind of help them along the way.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, really shaped me into the person that I am today with, like, my birth work. So
yes. Oh, well, huge congrats.
Thank you.
I think the most beautiful part of your story is your ability to really trust your body. And I think a lot of moms underestimate that mindset concept.
It does. Yes. Yeah. It makes a huge difference. Yeah. Yeah. Because even with my second, like, I tried. So I'm like, okay, my body, but there's still part of me that was holding on to the what ifs and, and I think that's partly due to, when you have a C-section, you get that doubt put into you, and, you're like, I didn't even labor with my first, like, we went, straight to C-section. And so I'm like, it was like almost like a first labor all over again, or a first baby, and like not even knowing what to expect at all, even though I had a baby already.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the harder things, to really try to separate our births, and especially as people that have had cesareans, to really dislocate that experience from our VBACs moving forward.
Yes. And every birth is so different. Like, even within the same woman, like, your births can be so different. Babies are so different. Like, it's just, it's amazing. They can be so much the same, but so different. Like, I went from a 36-hour labor and birth to 2 hours and 10 minutes from start to finish. Well, early labor was weeks, but I don't count that. It was, my water broke, and then 2 hours and 10 minutes later, he was born. Like, it was just so fast. And it wasn't like too fast where I'm like, I couldn't like process it, because I'm like, as long as it's under 12 hours, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
But it was so fast.
I would love to know some of, like, if there's any suggestions you would give for our listeners and getting into that place, like that mindset, like, what tips would you suggest for getting into that mindset? Because it can be really, really hard.
Definitely. It is. And, I think one aspect of it is, you look at social media, and if you are following accounts that aren't giving you like positive, good information, I think that can be really hard. And for me, in the beginning, I started unfollowing all these accounts that I'm like, okay, these are not good for me. And just started following accounts that were sharing positive birth stories and videos and just like all the good things that I needed to fill my mind with. And it made a really big difference for me. I watched birth videos of my daughters like every day. And because at first, I really wanted them there, but they were both sleeping, and that's what I needed in the end. But I think that, following accounts that give you good information, that are positive, that, watching birth videos that have, positive outcomes, and watching the things and listening to the things of the birth that you want.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that just makes a huge difference and helps your mindset.
I love that. Yep. Just jumping right into that space and not allowing any of the other things into that space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love
and just connecting with other women. I mean, that can be huge too.
Oh yeah.
And I'm a very faithful person, and I prayed a lot in this pregnancy and through our birth. And that's something that really helped me, and just kind of surrendering that, like, I wanted to be in control of everything, but also like surrendering that control too was huge.
That's awesome. Oh, I love it. I love it so much. I love your picture. I can't wait for everyone to see it. And if you're listening today, head over to our Instagram or our Facebook and look at this incredible picture for holding this sweet little baby. Oh, it's beautiful. It is so beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. I listened to your guys' podcast all through my second pregnancy, and it made such a big difference to me to hear other women's stories and just, different stories. And it was so helpful to me. So thank you.
Yes. Oh, that's one of my favorite things. We were talking about it in the beginning, but I love having people on that have listened through their whole pregnancy, and they're like, all these stories have changed my life. Now I'm going to share my story to help someone change theirs. And I love it so much. So thank you again. Congrats, Sarah. Thank you so much for being with us again. It's so fun. And Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah.
Happy New Year. It's kind of weird to say that because it's October right now as we're recording.
Right.
But
it'll be here sooner than we know. Really.
It will be here so soon.
Would you like to be a guest on the podcast? Tell us about your experience at thevbaclink.com/share. For more information on all things VBAC, including online and in-person VBAC classes, the VBAC blog, and Julie and Meagan's bios, head over to thevbaclink.com. Congratulations on starting your journey of learning and discovery with the VBAC Link.